Thunder rolled across the Montana sky as Dr. Sarah Chen peered through her microscope, analyzing her latest samples of deep-sea bioluminescent bacteria. The isolation of her research station, nestled in the foothills of the Rockies, usually meant peaceful nights of uninterrupted work. Tonight would prove different. The first warning came from her coffee cup. The liquid within rippled in perfect concentric circles, like something out of an old dinosaur movie. Then came the low-frequency hum that made her teeth ache. Sarah barely had time to step away from her equipment before the station's proximity alarms screamed to life. Through the reinforced windows of her lab, she watched a Galactic Conquerors ship materialize from within the storm clouds. Its crystalline hull scattered lightning like a prism, painting the rain-slicked ground in alien colors. Sarah had seen Conquerors ships in news feeds, but never this close, never landing in her backyard. Authentication protocol initiated, her station's AI announced with inappropriate cheerfulness. Galactic Conquerors credentials verified. 3 visitors approaching main airlock. Sarah smoothed down her wrinkled lab coat and tried to tame her disheveled hair. First contact protocols demanded formal attire, but at 3 a.m., she'd have to make do. The airlock cycled, and 3 figures entered. 2 were standard Conquerors peacekeepers in their flowing silver uniforms. The third made Sarah's scientific mind race with questions. It appeared to be constructed entirely of translucent crystal, its internal structure pulsing with complex patterns of light that seemed to follow some mathematical sequence she couldn't quite grasp. Dr. Sarah Chen, the first peacekeeper, said, their universal translator giving their voice an odd musical quality. By order of the Galactic Conquerors Council, and in accordance with Rehabilitation Statute 47 Beta, you have been selected as custodian for Citizen Designation 6427 of the Arcadian Collective. Sarah blinked. I'm sorry. What? The second peacekeeper produced a holographic document. The criminal will serve a 5-year rehabilitation sentence under your supervision. All necessary permits have been filed. Your credentials in xenobiology and your isolated location make you an ideal candidate. Criminal. Sarah studied the crystalline being more closely. They seemed to be trying to make themselves smaller, their light patterns dimming to barely visible pulses. What crime are we talking about? The peacekeepers exchanged glances. Citizen 6427 attempted to partition their consciousness from the collective mind, encouraging others to do the same. In Arcadian society, this is equivalent to mass murder. The standard sentence is dissolution. Sarah's throat went dry. Then why? Your ambassador Zhang argued that human supervision might prove more rehabilitative than execution. The council agreed to this experimental approach. The peacekeepers' tone suggested they thought this was a waste of time. 6427 moved forward slightly, their crystalline form catching the lab's lights and refracting them in complex patterns across the walls. Sarah noticed their structure wasn't purely geometric. There were organic curves and asymmetrical elements that seemed almost artistic. The criminal requires no sustenance, the second peacekeeper continued. They will interface with your research equipment to maintain basic functions. Any attempt to leave the designated 5-kilometer radius will result in immediate termination. Do you understand your responsibilities, Dr. Chen? Sarah wanted to say no, wanted to point out that she was a researcher, not a prison warden. But something in the way Zix's lights dimmed when the word termination was spoken made her pause. I understand, she heard herself say. The peacekeepers nodded curtly and turned to leave. At the airlock, one looked back. Oh, and Dr. Chen, the criminal may attempt to communicate with you. For your own safety, do not encourage this behavior. Individual thought is a contagion in their species. The airlock cycled shut. Through the window, Sarah watched the Conquerors ship rise into the storm and vanish. She turned to her new ward, who stood motionless in the center of her lab. As if sensing her attention, Zix's internal lights shifted, creating a pattern that reminded her of falling rain. Well, Sarah said to the empty air, I guess we should find you somewhere to stay. Sarah's first attempt at communication ended with her entire lab system crashing. She had simply tried to show Zix her research data, hoping to establish some common ground. The moment the crystalline being approached her main console, every screen in the facility erupted with cascading symbols before going dark. No. Sarah rushed to the backup terminal, fingers flying across the keys. 3 years of research data hung in the balance. The emergency systems kicked in, bathing the lab in red light. Zix recoiled, their internal lights flickering in what Sarah interpreted as distress. The pattern of their illumination shifted rapidly, creating complex interference patterns that seemed almost apologetic. "It's okay," Sarah said automatically, though she wasn't sure Zix could understand her. "Just, maybe don't touch anything else while I—" She stopped mid-sentence. The error messages on her screen were clearing themselves. New code wrote itself across the display faster than human fingers could type, restructuring her database in real time. After 30 seconds, her system not only restored itself, but ran faster than before. Zix's lights pulsed once, slowly, like a heartbeat. "Did you just optimize my entire system?" Sarah asked, knowing she wouldn't get a verbal response. To her surprise, Zix raised one crystalline appendage and made a gesture she could only interpret as a shrug. Over the next few hours, Sarah began to notice patterns in Zix's luminescence. Rapid, sharp pulses seemed to indicate anxiety or confusion. Slower, wave-like patterns emerged during moments of calm. When Sarah worked on her bacteria samples, Zix's lights would sync with the rhythm of her movements. She grabbed her tablet and started recording the patterns, matching them to context and apparent emotional states. By midnight, she had the beginnings of a rudimentary dictionary. "Okay, let's try something," she said, picking up a small hand mirror. She stood before Zix and held it up. "This is a mirror. It shows reflections." She gestured to her own face, then its reflection. Zix moved closer, their structure casting prismatic patterns across the lab. They studied the mirror intently, lights shifting through various configurations Sarah hadn't seen before. Then, to her astonishment, they began to change. Their crystalline form rearranged itself, creating a rough approximation of the mirror's shape. "That's not quite," Sarah began, but stopped. Zix wasn't mimicking the mirror. They were trying to mimic its function. One facet of their structure became highly polished, reflecting Sarah's face back at her. "You're a quick study," she murmured. An idea struck her. She pulled up a blank document on her tablet and began drawing simple symbols next to her recordings of Zix's light patterns. Zix watched intently. When she finished the first page, they extended a crystalline limb toward the tablet. Sarah hesitated, remembering the earlier crash, but handed it over. This time, Zix was more careful. They held the tablet gently, their internal lights synchronizing with its electronic pulse. The screen filled with new symbols, not random code, but variations on Sarah's drawings combined with mathematical representations of their own light patterns. They were creating a shared language. Sarah worked through the night, her excitement overriding exhaustion. By dawn, they had established basic concepts: yes, no, danger, safe, question, answer. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the sun rose, casting natural light through the lab windows, Zix's illumination changed again. They created a pattern Sarah hadn't seen before, something between a pulse and a wave, with complex harmonics that made her think of music. She checked her notes, but this was new. She made a questioning gesture they had established. Zix repeated the pattern, then slowly raised their crystalline form toward the sunrise. Sarah watched the light refract through their body, creating a symphony of color. In that moment, she realized the pattern wasn't just communication. It was appreciation, beauty. Perhaps, she thought, watching her alien ward bask in the morning light, the Arcadian collective was wrong. How could a being capable of recognizing beauty be devoid of individual consciousness? She added a new symbol to their growing dictionary. wonder. The first neural storm hit 3 weeks after Zix's arrival. Sarah was cataloging their shared symbol system when Zix's entire crystalline form began to vibrate. Their usually orderly light patterns fragmented into chaos, sending piercing beams in all directions. Zix. Sarah reached for them, then jerked back as an energy discharge scorched the lab bench. The air crackled with static electricity, and her hair stood on end. Through their newly developed communication system, Zix managed to convey one concept: pain. Equipment sparked and failed around them as Zix's structure pulsed with increasing intensity. Sarah's monitors showed energy readings off the scale, but beneath the chaos, she noticed something familiar in the patterns. They reminded her of the brain waves she'd observed in her bioluminescent specimens during stress responses. "You're having withdrawal symptoms," she realized aloud. "The collective consciousness. You're feeling its absence." Zix's lights flickered in what she'd come to recognize as agreement, but the pattern quickly dissolved into more chaotic bursts. A particularly violent discharge shattered several specimen containers. Sarah ran to her storage unit, grabbing the experimental neural dampeners she'd developed for her most sensitive organisms. They weren't designed for something as complex as Zix, but she had to try something. "Hold still," she shouted, approaching Zix despite the dangerous energy field around them. Her lab coat smoldered where stray energy bolts struck it, but she pressed forward. As she got closer, images flooded her mind. Whether from proximity to Zix or the ambient energy, she couldn't tell. She saw a vast crystalline city, its spires reaching into alien skies. Millions of beings like Zix, all connected, their thoughts flowing together in patterns too complex for her human mind to comprehend. The beauty of it brought tears to her eyes, but beneath it lay something darker. Conformity, the suppression of any unique thought, the terror of being different. Sarah pressed the neural dampeners against Zix's surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Zix's chaotic emissions began to stabilize. The random energy discharges decreased, and their internal lights slowly returned to more regular patterns. When the storm finally passed, Sarah's lab was in ruins. Scorch marks decorated the walls, and most of her electronic equipment would need replacing. She slumped against a relatively undamaged cabinet, exhausted. Zix approached her cautiously, their lights dim. Through their symbol system, they expressed concern for her safety, confusion about their loss of control, and something else: gratitude. "We need to talk about what just happened," Sarah said, pulling out her backup tablet. "These neural storms, they're going to get worse before they get better, aren't they?" Zix's response was complex, a mixture of light patterns that took her several minutes to decode. They explained that no Arcadian had ever been disconnected from the collective for this long. The storms were their system attempting to reach out, to reconnect with a network that wasn't there. "Like a phantom limb," Sarah mused, "but for your entire consciousness." She spent the next few hours questioning Zix about the collective, learning more about Arcadian society than any human xenologist had before. The images she'd seen during the storm had been real, a glimpse into Zix's memories of home. But with each answer came more questions, and a growing sense that Zix's crime had been more than simple rebellion. As dawn approached, Sarah made a decision. She began sketching plans for a modified neural dampener, one that might help ease the transition from collective to individual consciousness. Zix watched intently, offering suggestions through their growing symbol language. "We'll figure this out," Sarah promised, noting how Zix's lights had begun to take on patterns unique to their interactions, personal expressions that would have been impossible in the collective. Together. Zix's response was a new pattern, one she hadn't seen before. It reminded her of a sunrise, but with layers of complexity that suggested something more. Sarah added it to their dictionary, though she wasn't quite ready to label it what she suspected it might be. Trust. Sarah hadn't planned on introducing Zix to music. It happened by accident when she knocked her coffee mug against a metal cabinet, producing a clear ring. Zix's entire crystalline form had frozen, lights pulsing in sync with the fading resonance. "You like that sound?" Sarah asked, reaching for her tablet to document this new reaction. Before she could start recording, Zix moved closer to the cabinet and deliberately tapped it with a crystalline appendage. The resulting tone was purer than what Sarah had produced, carrying harmonics she could barely perceive. Sarah quickly pulled up an audio file on her tablet, a classical piece she sometimes played during late-night research sessions. As the first notes of Bach filled the lab, Zix's structure began to change. Their crystalline segments shifted and realigned, creating surfaces that caught and reflected the sound waves in increasingly complex patterns. "You're not just hearing it," Sarah realized, grabbing her instruments. "You're interacting with it at a molecular level." The readings were extraordinary. Zix's crystalline structure was actually reforming to match the music's harmonic frequencies, creating something between an amplifier and a living instrument. When the piece ended, Zix remained motionless for several seconds before their lights pulsed in what Sarah had come to recognize as excitement. Over the next few days, Sarah introduced Zix to every genre of music she could find. Classical produced the most complex structural changes, while jazz seemed to inspire more spontaneous light patterns. But it was traditional throat singing that truly transformed them. During a recording of Mongolian overtone singing, Zix's entire form resonated at multiple frequencies simultaneously. The lab filled with otherworldly harmonies as they learned to manipulate their structure to produce their own sounds. Sarah watched in amazement as Zix essentially became a living, crystalline orchestra. Word spread quickly through the scientific community. Despite the research station's isolation, videos of Zix's performances found their way online. Sarah began receiving requests from musicians and researchers alike, all wanting to experience the phenomenon firsthand. "We should be careful," Sarah warned Zix one evening, after turning down another interview request. The Concordat was clear about maintaining your isolation. Zix's response was to create a new melody, one that seemed to weave together human musical patterns with frequencies Sarah suspected came from their memories of the collective. The result was haunting and beautiful, making Sarah's chest tight with emotions he wasn't ready to examine too closely. Their musical experiments continued, and Sarah noticed something changing in Zix beyond their ability to produce sound. Their light patterns became more varied, more expressive. They began creating unique compositions that combined elements of human music with what Sarah theorized were Arcadian emotional expressions. One night, after a particularly moving performance, Sarah found Zix attempting to replicate the structure of a piano they'd seen in a video. "You know," she said, approaching them carefully, "most human musicians take years to master their instruments. You've basically invented a new form of music in weeks." Zix's lights shifted into what Sarah now recognized as their pattern for sharing knowledge. Through their symbol system, they explained that music was helping them understand human emotions in ways pure data couldn't. Each genre, each piece, carried emotional information that helped them process their own developing feelings. "And what feelings are you processing now?" Sarah asked, noticing a new pattern forming in Zix's core. Instead of using their symbol system, Zix began to play. The melody started simple, but grew increasingly complex, weaving together themes from their previous performances. Sarah recognized elements of joy, confusion, and something deeper, more intense. The music seemed to reach inside her, making her heart race and her skin tingle. When the song ended, the silence felt heavy with unspoken meanings. Sarah reached out and gently touched Zix's surface, feeling the lingering vibrations of their music. "I think," she said softly, "I understood that perfectly." Zix's lights pulsed once, bright and clear, like a star going nova. Neither of them needed their symbol system to translate what it meant. The Arcadian ships appeared at dawn, their crystalline hulls turning the sunrise into a kaleidoscope of refracted light. Sarah counted 7 vessels before her station's warning systems overloaded and shut down. Zix's lights dimmed to nearly nothing, a pattern she'd never seen before and hoped to never see again. "Fear. Warning," her eye managed before failing completely. Multiple unauthorized quantum signatures detected. Sarah rushed to the observation window. Unlike the elegant diplomatic vessel that had delivered Zix, these ships bristled with angular protrusions that could only be weapons. Their surfaces pulsed with aggressive red patterns that made Zix retreat to the furthest corner of the lab. Through their symbol system, Zix conveyed a single concept: purifiers. The first transmission came as a blast of pure data that fried half of Sarah's remaining equipment. The second, mercifully, used standard protocols. Dr. Sarah Chen, a voice like breaking crystal, filled the lab. You harbor an infection. The one designated Zix 427 has corrupted the collective consciousness. Their isolation was meant to prevent spread, but they have instead become a beacon for discord. Sarah moved to stand between Zix and the window. This facility is under Concordat protection. You have no authority here. The Concordat's experiment has failed. The voice carried harmonics that made her teeth ache. The criminal's musical transmissions have reached the collective. Young ones are beginning to question, to desire, individuality. The last word was filled with such disgust that Sarah felt it like a physical blow. Behind her, Zix's lights began to pulse with a pattern she recognized from their music: determination. Then maybe your collective needs questioning. Sarah shot back. Zix hasn't corrupted anything. They've shown that Arcadians are capable of individual thought and emotion. That's not corruption, it's growth. The ships moved closer, their weapons charging with visible energy. You speak of things you cannot understand, human. The collective is perfection, unity, purpose. The criminal's ideas are a cancer that must be excised. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. If you want Zix, you'll have to go through me. And that means violating about a dozen Concordat treaties. Treaties can be amended. Sacrifices must be made for purity. The lab's external sensors registered a massive energy buildup. Sarah knew her station's shields wouldn't hold against a direct hit. She turned to Zix, ready to tell them to run, but stopped short. Zix was changing. Their crystalline form had begun to emit frequencies she'd never seen before, combining patterns from their musical experiments with something entirely new. The remaining functional screens in the lab displayed readings that shouldn't have been possible. Through their symbol system, Zix conveyed their plan. Sarah's eyes widened. That could kill you, she protested. Zix's response was both simple and profound. Worth it. Before Sarah could argue further, Zix began to broadcast. But unlike their previous musical experiments, this transmission targeted the Arcadian ships directly. Sarah watched in awe as Zix channeled every frequency they'd learned, every emotion they'd experienced, into a single overwhelming signal. The effect was immediate. The attacking ships' weapon systems faltered. Their aggressive red patterns began to fluctuate, showing hints of colors Sarah had only seen in Zix's most expressive moments. What is this? The crystalline voice sounded uncertain for the first time. Truth, Sarah answered, understanding now what Zix was sharing. They're showing you everything. What it means to be an individual. To feel, to choose, to love. The ship's surfaces rippled as Zix's transmission continued. Sarah's remaining instruments registered confused communications between the vessels, fragments of debate and discord. Some wanted to fire anyway. Others were already being affected by Zix's broadcast, experiencing individual thoughts for the first time. Zix's structure began to show signs of strain, but they didn't stop. Their lights pulsed in a pattern Sarah had come to treasure, one that meant both everything and nothing, that transcended their symbol system and spoke directly to her heart. The pattern of starlight meant only for her. The strain of broadcasting their experiences proved too much. Sarah watched in horror as fracture lines appeared across Zix's crystalline surface, spreading like lightning through glass. Their lights flickered erratically, no longer forming coherent patterns. Stop. Sarah pressed her hands against their crystalline form, feeling the dangerous heat building within. You've done enough. They're retreating. Indeed, the Arcadian ships had begun to pull back, their weapon systems powered down. But Zix couldn't stop. The transformation had already begun. Pieces of their outer layer began to crack and fall away, each shard containing frozen patterns of light like memories turned solid. Sarah scrambled to collect them, burning her fingers on their superheated surfaces. Through their deteriorating symbol system, Zix managed to convey one clear message: no regret. Like hell on letting you die for your principles, Sarah muttered, rushing to her workstation. Years of studying bioluminescent organisms had taught her about the relationship between light, life, and consciousness. If Zix's consciousness was energy-based, perhaps. She grabbed her experimental quantum containment field generator, originally designed for preserving delicate deep-sea specimens. As more of Zix's structure fell away, Sarah noticed something extraordinary. The new layers revealed beneath weren't breaking. They were transforming. "Hold on," she begged, calibrating the containment field. "Just hold on." The remaining Arcadian ships hung motionless in the sky, their surfaces reflecting the extraordinary metamorphosis taking place below. Sarah's instruments registered quantum fluctuations that should have been impossible, as if reality itself was being rewritten on a molecular level. Zix's core began to pulse with new patterns, neither fully Arcadian nor anything Sarah had seen before. The crystalline structure flowing like liquid glass, forming neural pathways that mimicked human brain patterns while maintaining their alien nature. Each pulse sent waves of color through the reforming matrix, like thoughts made visible. Sarah worked frantically, using the containment field to stabilize the transformation. She hijacked her lab's power grid, rerouting everything to maintain the field's integrity. The lights flickered and died, leaving only Zix's glow to illuminate their work. Through the chaos, Sarah felt something brush against her consciousness. Not words or symbols, but pure emotion. Wonder, fear, trust. The touch was delicate but distinct, like fingers costing across her mind. "I feel you," she whispered, adjusting the field's frequency to match Zix's new resonance. "Stay with me." Hours passed in a blur of emergency repairs and desperate calculations. Sarah's hands moved on instinct, guided by equal parts science and something deeper, something that understood Zix's needs on a level beyond conscious thought. When her equipment failed, she improvised. When traditional physics couldn't explain what she was seeing, she trusted her gut. Finally, as the sun began to set, the transformation stabilized. Zix's new form retained its crystalline nature, but had evolved into something unprecedented. Their structure now contained organic elements that pulsed with life, neural pathways that bridged the gap between collective and individual consciousness. "Zix." Sarah reached out tentatively. "Can you hear me?" Their response came not through their old symbol system, but as a direct impression in her mind. The sensation was overwhelming. Like experiencing every piece of music they'd ever shared at once, but filtered through emotions so pure they brought tears to her eyes. "Well," she said, wiping her eyes, "I guess we'll need a new dictionary." Zix's new form shimmered with amusement. They extended a portion of their structure toward her, and where it touched her skin, Sarah felt an echo of their thoughts. Not the overwhelming flood of their consciousness, but a gentle sharing, like holding hands in the dark. Above them, the Arcadian ships finally began to depart. Their surfaces showed signs of change too, subtle alterations in their crystalline patterns that suggested Zix's broadcast had affected more than just their weapon systems. As the last ship disappeared into the atmosphere, Zix formed a new pattern in their core, one that combined elements of their old light language with their new neural structure. Sarah didn't need their symbol system to understand its meaning. It was the pattern for transformation, for evolution, for hope. The first refugee arrived 3 days after Zix's transformation. Sarah found the young Arcadian huddled against her lab's outer wall, their crystalline form flickering with distress patterns she recognized from Zix's early days. Within a week, there were 5 more. By the end of the month, her research station had become a sanctuary for 23 Arcadian dissidents. "They're calling you the Lightbringer," Sarah told Zix one evening, reviewing the latest reports from the Conquerors. Their broadcast had sparked something unprecedented in Arcadian society. Choice. Zix, still adjusting to their new form of communication, shared their discomfort with the title through a gentle mental impression. They weren't a revolutionary, just someone who had dared to be different. The revolution had come from within the collective itself. Sarah's tablet chimed with another assassination warning from her security system. The third this week. Conservative Arcadian factions had placed a bounty on both their heads, her for corrupting Zix, and Zix for showing others it was possible to exist outside the collective. "They're getting desperate," Sarah noted, watching one of their newest arrivals learning to manipulate sound waves under Zix's guidance. "Your people are changing faster than they can control." The young Arcadians' attempts at music were clumsy but earnest, their lights forming patterns that reminded Sarah of a child's first words. Each small victory was a testament to the possibility of change. Through their neural link, Zix shared memories of their own early struggles with individuality. The terror of first questioning the collective. The isolation. The doubt. But now each new arrival had something Zix hadn't: community. A proximity alert interrupted their reflection. Sarah tensed, reaching for the defense controls, but Zix's sudden joy through their link stopped her. The approaching ship wasn't hostile. The vessel that landed outside the station was smaller than the military ships, its crystalline hull displaying patterns Sarah had learned to read as diplomatic signals. The being that emerged made her catch her breath. "Ambassador Zhang," she whispered. The mysterious human diplomat who had argued for Zix's rehabilitation instead of execution. Their arrival could mean anything. The ambassador surveyed the collection of transformed Arcadians with obvious satisfaction. "When I suggested this experiment to the Conquerors, they said, 'I hoped for change.' But this," they gestured to where Zix and Sarah stood together, "this exceeds all expectations." Experiment. Sarah felt Zix's curiosity mirror her own. Zhang smiled. "We've been watching Arcadian society for decades, looking for signs they could handle real contact with other species. Their rigid collective consciousness made meaningful exchange impossible. They needed to learn that diversity isn't a weakness. So you used us as catalysts," Sarah realized. Through their link, she felt Zix processing this revelation without anger. Their time with Sarah had taught them that manipulation could sometimes come from a place of hope. "The Conquerors is ready to negotiate," Zhang continued. "Your sanctuary has proven that Arcadians can develop individual consciousness without losing their connection to others. It's revolutionary." Sarah felt Zix's emotion surge through their link, not pride, but responsibility. They shared a vision of more sanctuaries, of safe spaces where Arcadians could explore individuality without fear. "We'll help," Sarah said, knowing Zix's mind on this. "But on our terms, no more experiments. These are people, not test subjects." Zhang nodded. "The Conquerors agrees. In fact, they're prepared to recognize your union as the first official human-Arcadian partnership. Assuming, of course, that's what you both want." Sarah's heart skipped. She and Zix hadn't discussed their relationship in such formal terms, though their neural link made words somewhat redundant. Through their connection, she felt Zix's response. A complex emotion that translated roughly to, "as if there was ever any doubt." Outside, the young Arcadians were attempting a group harmony, their lights synchronizing in patterns that combined collective precision with individual expression. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. Like love, Sarah thought. Like revolution. Like hope. The wedding ceremony took place 1 year after the first refugees arrived. Sarah's research station, now expanded into the first human Arcadian integration center, gleamed with crystalline additions that blended seamlessly with the original structure, much like its inhabitants. "Are you ready?" Ambassador Zhang asked, adjusting Sarah's dress. The garment was a marvel of bioengineering, interwoven with crystalline fibers that responded to her emotions with subtle shifts of color. "I've been ready since they crashed my computer systems," Sarah replied, watching through the window as hundreds of guests arrived. Human diplomats mingled with transformed Arcadians, while representatives from the collective observed with cautious curiosity. The ceremony space itself showcased their groundbreaking work. Sarah and Zix had developed what they called the resonance chamber, a quantum-engineered environment where individual consciousness could safely experience collective awareness. It would allow their guests to truly understand both perspectives. Zix waited at the center of the chamber, their revolved form casting rainbow patterns across the walls. Through their neural link, Sarah felt their anticipation, their joy, and beneath it all, their continued amazement at how a punishment had become salvation. As Sarah walked down the aisle, the chamber activated. Human guests gasped as their minds gently expanded, experiencing the edge of collective consciousness. Transformed Arcadians shared their memories of isolation and discovery, while those still connected to the collective felt, for the first time, the beauty of individual thought. "We are gathered here," John began, their voice carrying harmonics that resonated with both human and Arcadian sensibilities, to celebrate not just a union of two beings, but a bridge between ways of existing. Sarah felt Zix's consciousness brush against hers, sharing memories. Their first clumsy attempts at communication. The musical discoveries. The moment of transformation. Each memory carried the weight of change. Personal, cultural, universal. "The rings," John prompted. Sarah's sister stepped forward with two quantum-locked bands. The metal was infused with fragments from Zix's original form, allowing them to serve as both wedding rings and communication devices. Through the resonance chamber, every guest experienced the moment Sarah and Zix exchanged rings. Humans felt the profound connection of shared consciousness, while Arcadians understood the intense personal nature of individual love. There wasn't a dry eye, human or crystalline, in the chamber. "By the power vested in me by both Earth's United Nations and the Galactic Concordat," John declared, "I now pronounce you unified in all forms of consciousness." The kiss was unconventional, a merger of light, thought, and emotion that rippled through the chamber. The transformed Arcadians erupted in harmonic celebration, their music carrying meanings that transcended traditional language. At the reception, Sarah watched their guests experiment with the resonance chamber's capabilities. Human scientists engaged in silent communion with Arcadian scholars. Children played with young crystalline beings, their laughter harmonizing with light patterns. Even the conservative Arcadian observers showed signs of change, their rigid patterns beginning to adopt more fluid individual variations. Having second thoughts about corrupting an entire species, Sarah teased through their link, feeling Zix's amused response. Their answer came as a complex sharing of emotion and memory. The pain of isolation transformed into the joy of connection, the fear of difference becoming celebration of diversity. Through their bond, they shared a vision of the future, more integration centers, more transformations, a galaxy where collective and individual consciousness could coexist and enrich each other. As the celebration continued, Sarah and Zix moved to the observation deck. The Montana sunset painted the sky in colors that reminded them both of their first days together. Below, construction had already begun on the next phase of the integration center. Dormitories for new refugees, research facilities, and gathering spaces designed for both human and Arcadian comfort. "We should thank the purifiers," Sarah mused. "Their attack brought us here." Zix's response carried through their link with characteristic humor. "Perhaps we should send them an invitation to the next wedding." Several of their former refugees had begun forming their own unique bonds with human partners. Sarah laughed, leaning against Zix's crystalline form. Their light patterns shifted to match her heartbeat, a habit they'd developed during their early days together. Some called their relationship impossible. Others called it revolutionary. They simply called it love.